Thanks everybody for being here tonight. Once again, we're just coming back to order. This is the Poolesville Town Commissioners Meeting for Monday, the 22nd of January, 2018. We have some unbelievable guests here tonight. I'm so happy that everybody was able to come up and be a part of this. And by that, I mean part of our school board staff, the superintendent, director of building. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. But on top of that, everybody that's in our audience that are concerned citizens about Poolesville and our school cluster. And I mean, we really have like the who's who of people that are here right now. And I love to see it. So ahead of time, thanks to everybody in the audience. Thank you guys for coming up here. This is our town commissioners. We're missing one. Chuck Stump is not here, so he had a work obligation. We have all of our town commissioners that are here. Jerry is our school liaison. I'm sure you've seen him before. Kevin Schramm, also our cluster coordinator. He's sitting in the honorary commissioner's seat. So that's great. Town manager Wade Yost is there. So Wade kind of runs the show for the rest of us in terms of the town, does a great job. Also in the audience, I wanted to say that we had Link Hoeing, former cluster president. He can raise his hand. He helped us kind of prepare for this meeting as well. And we leaned on a few other people. So it was just thanks to everybody that was a part of helping us get here and be productive tonight. So, and we will have a chance for one or two questions from the audience, but you can tell we've already prepared questions here. If we left something out, we'll try to deal with it as best we can. And I've circulated the questions. If anybody has questions about the questions, or they need more copies of the questions, now's the time to speak up. If not, then we're gonna get going with what we're doing here. So, yes, ma'am.
I'd like a copy.
There you go. Look, more. Here you go. Pass one down. There you go. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Look what happens when you sit on the end, Valerie. There's more if you need them, you guys. All right, so, and once again, and also too, just for the audience that were here before, believe it or not, the police usually come to our meetings, and they're just concerned citizens too. So, to members of the school staff, just to let you know, this is a normal thing. I mean, you usually get one or two. Tonight we got three, so they'll be the first to tell you that they're here usually to keep me in line. So, glad to have them here. I'm either happy or ashamed to say I'm on a first name basis with all of them. So, now, anyway, they're here and they're just part of our community as far as we're concerned. So. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves and introduce everybody that came with you and let us know who you are.
Sure. I'm Jack Smith, the school superintendent. Been here about 19 months. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been to Poolesville many times, actually, because my wife and I come and eat at the restaurant right down the street.
All right.
Been through all three of your schools. Visited them on a drive around, get out, run in the office immediately the first summer I was here. And then since then I've been back and visited through all of the high school, all of the middle school, been to the elementary a couple of times actually, once for a visit and once to bring a message to a student who did something really special in class, and that was really fun. So it's really a pleasure to be here tonight. And I met a few of you, but most of you is the first time we actually had a chance to see you. So pleasure.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Andy Zuckerman, Chief Operating Officer for the district, and as you see a lot of familiar faces here tonight, I'm going to toggle back and forth between facing the commissioners, facing you. We'll see how this works, but
That's fine.
A short presentation that I think gets at least three of the four questions, if not all four questions that you asked, and then we look forward to the dialogue. So I look forward to this.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm Essie McGuire. I'm Executive Director for Operations, and I really look forward to being here tonight and having this conversation.
And Seth Adams, Director of Design Construction for MCPS. So again, thank you all for the invitation tonight.
Adrian Kerventas, I'm the Acting Director for the Division of Capital Planning, and thank you. And hopefully we'll get all your questions answered as best as we can.
Awesome. Anybody else? One thing I do want to mention is we do have our school principals here, of which this would be very difficult if they weren't. So, Dina, if you don't mind, please stand up. Dina Levine, our principal of Poolesville High School. Let's give her a round. Come on. She told me she would be mad at me if I didn't introduce her. I'm kidding. And then we have our new middle school principal. Go ahead, sir. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm John Green.
John Green keeps it short and sweet. And then we have our elementary school principal, Doug Robbins, is actually conducting business at the elementary school tonight, so he will be attending later. And if you guys, we can just give him a huge round of applause when he comes in. And that's fine. And then we have our Monocacy Elementary School principal here too. They were pointing. Yes, thank you. Sorry. I just thought you would stand up on your own. My apologies. I saw you back there. All right, very good. Any other dignitaries that want to announce themselves before we get rolling? No? Okay, good. I know we see teachers in there too, so that's awesome. Thanks for being here, you guys. Everybody, thanks for being here. I turn it over to you, and let's have your presentation, gang.
Sure, and as we go through this presentation, we will try, and the questions are a combination of program questions, facility questions, and future predictions. So making future predictions is always a little bit dicey, but we'll try and tell you what we know, what we think we know, and then what we actually just don't know in terms of what could happen in the future. And so we'll try and hit those as we go through so that we weave it all together, because facility and program are always tied together. I mean, there's really no way really to separate them in the application of the education of children. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Zuckerman and Ms. McGuire, because they're going to walk us through the slides, and then we'll weave the information in as we go and do that.
Before you guys start, can I make one request? Try to use a microphone as much as possible so it picks up, because we have a lot of people in the lobby who can't see us and hear.
Great. So I will, as I do the presentation, I'll speak into the mic, speak to the slides, with all due respect to the audience behind me. And we're going to keep it brief, because we know we want to get to questions. So let me just provide a little bit of context, much of which you already know from earlier CIP presentations, but I think it'd be good just to have a general framing. So our themes for this year in terms of our CIP, I think are really important just to highlight. We're in a period of transition, and what we're trying to do right now is reposition the capital improvements program, the CIP, within what's become a very dynamic planning environment. We're in just a much different era in terms of growth and planning than we were even 10, 15 years ago. And so the CIP, we're trying to reposition to be responsive to that dynamic environment. And in order to do that, we need to have flexibility in the CIP, and that's not something that our CIP was known for. And so we're looking to create more flexibility. And another big theme this year is actually the secondary school project. We've been talking quite a bit for a few years now about the enrollment growth, and I'll show you that in just a moment. And that wave of enrollment growth is really hitting secondary schools. And so the CIP there's a big focus on secondary schools in this current CIP, the next 6 years. I won't get into this it's too detailed. Everyone knows the story of enrollment growth in Montgomery County over the last 10 years. This slide just illustrates that. Over 22,000 students we've added to the school district. And for Poolesville specifically, there's over the next 6 years anticipated slight growth, but largely in Poolesville we're holding steady. And that's important as we talk about the CIP. With regards to enrollment, because of the dynamic changes that we have in terms of urbanization of the county, walkable communities, the days of master plan development are largely over. There's still some build out, obviously in Clarksburg and other parts of the county, and some new development coming online all the time, but the Greenfield master planning process has given way to a different type of planning environment, and that really demands for us a look at how we conduct our enrollment projections. And so we are working with an external consultant, a very well-respected group called MGT, works with a number of school districts around the country to review our projection methodology. Our challenge over the last 5-6 years has been to tailor what we do at the countywide level with enrollment projections to regional and neighborhood variances. And so this is just part of our ongoing work that I think you need to know because it's such a driver of the CIP. I don't think it has too much of a bearing on Poolesville specifically because of just the constant and the nature of the growth here. But I just think it's helpful to keep in mind for the context of the overall CIP. So for this CIP, the one over 19 to 24, fiscal year 19 to 24, we requested, Dr. Smith requested of the board $1.83 billion. The board approved that CIP. That was $86 million higher than the last CIP. And the goal really with this CIP is to address many critical capacity projects that have to do with the growth I just talked about, as well as aging infrastructure. There are total of 30 total capacity projects, and you can see where they are: 15 additions and 3 new schools at elementary, 6 additions at middle school, and 4 additions and 2 new schools at the high school level. The county executive just released his CIP last week, as you're probably aware, and is recommending $79 million less than what the Board of Education requested. And so over the next couple of months, we'll have to go through that process, the reconciliation process with the county council, and how we come to terms with the county executive's request and what the board's request was. This year in the CIP, we have a shift. Historically, this slide would be broken up essentially into thirds. A third of our CIP would go to capacity projects in the past, that is growth. A third would go to the old revitalization expansion program, or formerly the school modernization program. And a third would generally go to the countywide projects, HVAC, planned life cycle, asset replacement, roof replacement, things like that. This year, you can see by this chart that we've actually had a pretty serious shift, that 45% of this year's CIP is really going to capacity. And that's a lot of that is eaten up at the secondary level, as I mentioned earlier. So that, to a certain extent, crowds out some of the ability to do some other things. And we're always, as you know, competing for limited dollars. So I just want to highlight a shift there in this CIP compared to previous CIPs. With regards to the RevX, Revitalization Expansion Programs, I know that's on a lot of people's minds here in Poolesville. I want to tell you what we're doing. So in plain terms, for many, many years, going back to the early 90s, we had a long list of projects, and we were trying to systematically, essentially, rebuild and replace all of our aging schools in our inventory. And that was a very laudable goal at the time. It made a lot of sense at the time. And really what's happened is we've fallen short of our ability to realize that goal. We're being challenged over here on the enrollment growth and the capacity side to meet the obligations that we had in what was the school modernization program and then the RevX program. And in fact, even just that name change several years ago from modernization to RevX, revitalization and expansion, was a real signal that when you did a modernization, we were also adding expansion and adding capacity. And it became really clear that we needed a mechanism to bring the two together. We were having capacity projects happening on this side of the house, modernization projects happening here, and there wasn't a very clear mechanism to line the two up because of the rigidity of the way we approached the modernization program. And so we're in the process of reimagining that program, moving away from a very static assessment process with our schools, what was known as FACT, the Facility Assessment with Criteria and Testing. The FACT score that gave one single composite score at a point in time that then drives where you are in that modernization program. We want to move away from that static model to one where we're constantly assessing what we're calling KFIs, our key facility indicators, to look to see what are the critical projects that need to be done. When can we get them done? How do we get the funding there? How do we marry those projects with growth and capacity? And in some cases, that will lead to what we think of as a RevX. And in other places, it may lead to other major capital projects that don't that aren't a full tear-down rebuild, like in the modernization program, but that meet the needs of the building. And all of that is where we are in terms of, we're working through that process right now. That process is governed by 2 policies that I just highlight there. Policy FAA, which is our long-range education facilities planning policy, as well as policy FKD, sustaining and modernizing MCPS facilities. We have a board meeting tomorrow, actually. Policy Management Committee is meeting tomorrow to take up these two policies because, as you well know, being the Board of Commissioners, policy needs to drive the decisions we make. So we have to sequence this the right way, and that's why we're in a transition year. And we have to work with the Board of Education's Policy Management Committee to make changes to these policies that then will inform the CIP for next year in the amendment year. And we can answer a lot of questions about that in a moment. So we're in the RevX policy transition. What that means for us is where we've got 5 RevX projects that are going to be completed consistent with current policy, and that's Lux Manor, Maryvale, Carl Sandburg, Potomac Elementary School, Tilden Middle School, and Rock Terrace, and Central Valley High School. Those projects have funding and they are underway, so it makes sense for them to continue. Then we have schools that were previously identified for the RevX program where the conditions need to be evaluated in the context of the new policy approach. And you see the list of schools here, including Poolesville High School, including Wooten High School, including Magruder, Stonegate, Twinbrook, Damascus High School, many schools that don't have funding appropriated but had a date on the queue, on the list. Well, we're in a period right now where we need to evaluate these schools in the context of the new policy approach. So we're having this conversation all over the county because we want to make sure that everyone understands the transition period we're in. So I just want to close by inviting my colleague Seth Adams, our head of construction, to give you some examples of the recent facility projects that we've had in the Poolesville cluster, what we have planned going forward, and then we can talk about next steps and answer questions.
So we wanted to bring today just a snapshot of a few of the things that are happening within the cluster. As Dr. Zuckerman pointed out, in terms of the overall CIP program, there's a large percentage that's dedicated to systemic programs, which include everything from HVAC replacements to roof replacements, really just the management of facilities that are in our fleet. We will have 205 facilities, over 25 million square feet of facilities to maintain, so it's certainly not a small feat to keep ahead of schedule. So certainly many of these cases we're working to manage expectations of schools, manage systems. You'll see a lot of things on there such as HVAC replacements, restroom renovations. Those are all part of our programs to keep our facilities certainly meeting the expectations of students, staff, as well as communities. You'll see in the list here from advocacy, we have, there's restroom renovations, fire alarm replacements. We are scheduled to do an HVAC replacement in the next several years. Similar at Poolesville Elementary School, there's certain upkeep that's been involved from things from gym floor replacements to interior renovation type of painting, restroom replacements. We're also looking out to look for energy improvements. You'll see things such as lighting replacements, where we're really looking at LED type replacements, especially when you look at gyms, you look at classrooms. A lot of technology that's been evolving over the years, so they're certainly trying to capture and improve our facilities through that. The middle school, certainly similar things, the gym floor replacement, restroom replacements, and looking out for roof replacement there as well. You'll see on a couple of these, you'll see security. There is a security initiative, so in each facility we're looking at security improvements. Poolesville High School, which we're going to go to next, that's certainly a facility where we're looking at, we will be implementing certain security implementation measures this summer, as well as starting the design of what a security vestibule will look like there. So we'll be certainly working closely with the administration on that. At the high school, so you'll see a list of things just over the years that have been involved. Again, you'll see a theme here: HVAC, fire life safety, certain things around locker room, restrooms. But more importantly, a lot of work in terms of classroom modifications, really trying to make sure we adapt to certain programs. We'll routinely be out in a lot of schools, particularly we've been out at Poolesville High School quite often. We'll also be out there again this summer to look at existing spaces to see where we can improve, to make sure the facilities, like Dr. Smith talked about, the facilities and the program mesh. That's really where we rely heavily on our data, but we also rely heavily on the advocacy of the school. Working closely with the principal and the school staff is certainly beneficial to each individual. Make sure that we prioritize our facility improvements around these items. Beyond that, some of the things that we're really taking a hard look at are how to, again, we have 205 facilities over 25 million square feet. Make sure our facilities match the 21st century learning requirements. So you really start to, particularly at the high school level, you'll start to hear a lot of conversations around the media center, around cafeteria, there's common spaces, auditorium. From an MCPS perspective, really looking at these spaces to make sure we have flexible spaces, that we don't just have specific spaces for really specific purposes. Looking to see how we can look to improve those spaces to lost our slide.
That's the last slide.
Here goes another half hour.
Hit the enter button, maybe?
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. So look to see how we can start to bring that new program, the new thought process, the new teaching aspect to the facilities. So you look at that facility, there's lots of elements within that facility that we can focus on. We're going to look at, again, I talked about lighting. Lighting is one of those aspects in the classroom that makes a big difference. In the common spaces, it makes a big difference. Spending a lot of time to understand what the implications are around each facility. Again, the media center at high schools, it's been a changing, evolving space. That's an area we really want to focus on, because it's not just a few times a day. It's really trying to create an environment where students can get in there. They want to be in those spaces and to learn and grow. So there's a couple things on the slide, but certainly from that perspective, really just looking at the building and trying to see how we can bring it up to a 21st century learning environment, make sure we match and keep pace with the great program elements that are happening there.
So I just want to close by saying we spoke a lot about, obviously, the capital budget here. And the first question that you had sent us really spoke to program and academic programs. And we don't ever want to have our facilities drive programs. In fact, we want program to drive facilities, and part of the idea in the transition to the RevX program is to find ways where programmatic elements can also be fed into what we do. But in the meantime, here in Poolesville, there are no plans to remove programs or downgrade anything of the sort. The idea here is to continue to enhance, continue to improve our facilities, make sure that we have the spaces available to continue to show those programs we have here thrive, and that teaching and learning that's taking place here, which is obviously excellent. We want to make sure that we continue on that path. So we want to support that. But I know there's some questions about the operating budget. We can get into that shortly, I'm sure. But with that, we certainly want to open up for discussion and questions. And Dr. Smith, if there's anything else you want to add.
If you'd like, we'll just go through these questions.
Feel free. That would be awesome.
And anywhere we didn't address a topic, we'll address it now.
Very good. Yep, good. You've obviously touched on a lot of this, so we appreciate that.
As Dr. Zuckerman said, the operating budget does not provide, the question is, the operating budget does not provide any details on a per school basis. So it's hard to know what is in store for our cluster from a programmatic standpoint. And there are no changes to programs in Poolesville anticipated at all in FY19. And certainly I don't have any that I'm aware of in FY20. I mean, beyond that, we'll just have to see where the world goes. One thing that we are interested in, and we put this in the budget, is ongoing efforts to begin an agricultural program and get an agricultural reserve. We're exploring that right now, and that certainly would affect Poolesville more than it would many of our other areas of the county, but we want to make it available to students across the county. That is one of the questions when we think about the question here about what can you tell us to reassure us and provide clarity about, MCPS views our cluster in its future. This is 1/25th of our clusters. It's one of our high schools and a set of schools that feed into that. And so it is as important as any other cluster. It's no more important than any cluster, but it's unique as each one is based on its size, its location, and the context around the school, what it is. So you have to look at them as very individual places across the county to create opportunities for students everywhere, no matter where they live. And I can't imagine that there would be any way to provide the services that are needed for the students who live in and around this community without a Poolesville cluster. I can't see that in any way in any foreseeable future in my mind, because it's critical for the families that live here and the children that live here to have the program and an equitable set of opportunities for their future. So, in terms of having a crystal ball, I don't know. But what I would say is, to give a little context to what Andy said, one of the things I like to do when I move to a different place, and I lived in Washington State for the beginning of my career for the first 13 years, I think. Then I lived in Tokyo, Japan for 6 years. Then I lived in Southern Maryland for about 15 years. And then I worked at the state for 3 years, and now I'm in Montgomery County, so I want to get to know this community. So one of the things I found out in the history of this community is between 1971 or 2 and the late 80s, Montgomery County Public Schools went from 125,000 students to in the mid 80s, like 87,000 students, and closed 61 schools. And one of the reasons that the county was able to keep up with their modernization during the 90s was because they had closed so many schools that needed the most modernization and innovation. And so that's really what has been driving the reduction of modernization from the 90s to the early 2000s, now to the second decade of the 2000s. But on the other hand, who could have predicted that the school system would go from 125,000 to 80,000 to 162,000 over that time period? That's a really amazing. So I'm always a little reluctant to ever make predictions about too far out in the future, because I think we just don't know what things will look like. I don't think any of you want to hear this, and I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime, but someday there could be a city here. I mean, there could be. You would all say, well, wait, it's the agricultural reserve. I know, but who knows what 50 years from now will look like in any of Montgomery County or any of Maryland, for that matter. So, but for the foreseeable future, there are no expected changes in program, in service, in the way that we meet the needs of the children in this community, just like across the other 24 clusters. So I think we hit the things in question one.
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, I think most people in this room want to hear that you appreciate and recognize the uniqueness of the cluster, recognizing that all of the clusters have their own special characteristics, but ours is unique in its own way, probably unlike any others that you may not share too many characteristics with. And I do know that the people in this room, the people behind the desk, everybody in the audience, I mean, one of the biggest parts of this question is that are we going to maintain our magnet programs? We know there's going to be potentially pressure from down county clusters and potentially new Crown High School, et cetera. In addition to other things that we're going to address here in a minute, I don't think there's anything bigger in our mind that the county remains committed to the excellence, the absolute excellence of Poolesville High School and our cluster, as well as the programming that's required to keep us there, and the program that's required at the middle and elementary school level, despite a static student population.
Support that.
Yeah, that's big for us. We're here because of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
what I would say to you in reference to that is, I don't see Crown as a solution for the needs of the students in Poolesville. I just drove from near Crown to come here tonight. That's not a reasonable commute for children or adolescents, especially in the morning and evening rush hour. Just not. I mean, families may choose to do that, and they make the choices, but we have a whole community of people here and adjacent to this community that are served by this school. I don't see any potential that we will not need this school cluster and the programs that are here in the foreseeable future. And of course, as you said, the children who go to the elementary schools, the children and the middle school, are going to need opportunities, or they will not be able to go to those magnet programs wherever they were located. So they have to have that.
ultra important. And thank you for saying that out loud. Does that? I'm not asking for any exact input, but I'm hoping that answers some of the questions from the audience regarding that subject. We can get into it a little bit more on some of the next questions that are part of this. Commissioners, anybody else, anything on that?
No, I'll reserve till after they go through.
Okay, good. Yeah, all right, keep on going to question number 2 then, or I know you've already probably dived into this, but let's keep on moving. That was good and we appreciate it.
One of the problems in question 2, and this is always a challenge, is you work projection to projection and you work actual enrollment to actual enrollment. And we never want to confuse those two. So I think it might be worthwhile if the facilities folks here would talk a little bit about projections and what their purpose is.
Certainly, thank you. And another aspect we want to talk about with the projections is, as Dr. Zuckerman was talking about earlier, is that we have been working to refine our methodology for projections. And part of our effort there really is to bring what is always a struggle, or a challenge rather, at the macro countywide level, when increasingly our county is made up of so many different kinds of communities and neighborhoods and schools. Every area, each area has its own dynamic, and we really want to try to capture that more in our projections. And so part of our methodology approach is to really look more regionally and more distinctly. We, of course, still need to look at the macro district level, because that's an important piece of information for us. But we want to do both. We want to work on the macro and also work a little bit more on the micro in the cluster dynamics that, again, are unique and different across the county. So that is one piece that we are really working towards with our consultants and as we go forward. And part of that will help us understand, again, the dynamics that are necessary within each of the schools in those areas, and how we can better address what those various program and facility needs might be going forward. We're trying to look both in the immediate term and in the longer term, certainly with the consciousness, as Dr. Smith was saying, that none of us have a crystal ball. And so our projections really are about trends. They're about trying to understand where we see the trends going over these various periods of time, both the immediate capital planning period that we're working with the 6 years, as well as going beyond that. But we also have to know that those trends themselves are also dynamic, and that what we see right now is not necessarily going to hold true for the next 6 or 10 years, but that each year we'll take another look at what that trend's showing us and where the direction seems to be. And again, that's one reason why I want to include that level of flexibility in our planning, so that as we see those trends evolving, we can then adapt and make recommendations that meet the needs that we see ahead of us.
And so the last question, or the question at the bottom of number 2 says, what assurance do we have that our schools will not continue to lose programs and staff? We staff our schools based on a variety of different formulas, starting with just the number of kids in the school. So if you take an elementary school and you have 20 students in kindergarten, you'll have one classroom teacher. If you have 40, you'll have 2. It always gets tricky when you're on that bubble, and we always caution and say we staff, these are guidelines, it's not an exact science. And so we'll continue to do that for Poolesville, for all the schools in Poolesville, just like we would for all the schools around the county. And that's just an ongoing look at the number of students, the types of programs in the school, the types of staff and teaching certification and so forth that school requires, the schedule that a principal and the guidance counselor and assistant principal put together, and all of that goes into the mix. But nothing would change in Poolesville like it wouldn't in any other school or cluster, just based on where we are with the schools enrollment.
And across the elementary schools in particular, but even the variation across middle schools is fairly significant. There is a threshold at which you have to staff a school. That's just what it comes down to. And so among the smaller elementary schools across the county, and there are many smaller elementary schools, they get staffed to make sure that they have all of the programs, all of the opportunities that any other student gets. And, obviously to choose between schools, we have a few elementaries now that are up over 1,000, 1,200 students. Our goal right now is to reduce the size of those schools. And that's got to be the effort around that. And so there is a threshold at which you just staff the school. So that means if you have 17 first graders in the class, you still have a first grade class. And that's critical for small elementary and middle schools. And then certainly the question, then goes to the high school too. As a former high school, middle school principal for many years, you just work out your staffing, and sometimes you have to go back to the school district and say, in order to provide the program that we've guaranteed the community, students and families, we need an additional teacher, or a half a teacher, or 2 half teachers, because we need these disciplines and these programs in our school. And that's how not just Poolesville, but across the county, we have to be responsive in that way to schools.
I can appreciate that. And one thing I say is that before we go any further, make no mistake about it, no matter what anybody says anytime, we are extremely grateful for the staff and for the dedication of staff that has been provided to us in the county. We absolutely have top quality people. They fit in our community. That's very important to us. As we said, we know we're special, and you've given us special, and that makes a big deal for us. Part 2 of that is, I would say, is that one thing you can count on is that you may have your projections and you may have to worry about, how things are going to go other places, but this is as stable as it gets. You'll never not be able to plan on what we have going on here. We are a town that gets in a hissy fit over building 10 houses or 20 houses, 30 houses. We're not a town that's going to build 1,000 house subdivision. This is as stable as it gets here in Poolesville. So I'm hoping that you'll take our stability as a sign of both dedication to the cluster as well as something that you can bank on as time goes on. We're going to be here. We're going to have smart kids coming here. We're going to have smart parents that come here because we have smart kids coming here. And we do all that because of what you guys provided and the dedication of our staff and administrators. So keep up the good work on that. We're counting on it. And I know the people here, that comes tailors into programs and future direction, et cetera. So I appreciate that.
Let me just add, we may be stable on a number of houses, but we're not stable in population growth. And I know, at the elementary school, they had 68 more kids this year than what MCPS projected. So, we have families coming in, families creating new families, adding to families. So, that's a concern of ours. And when you speak to the programs, I know I've spoken with JPMS parents who have told me that, and I know from back when Joe Sacco was Rick Bishop, Charlotte Boucher, they were principals at the middle school, that programs and teacher hours kept on getting reduced because the student population got reduced, and parents were concerned that the number of electives that were offered to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students was limited to 2, and that was it. So when we talk about equality and equity, we're talking about, if down county students have a choice of 6 electives to choose from at the middle school level, we would like to see that here in our schools. We would like to have them available of it. And with all of the technology that has come about, that we would think that somehow we could do things, whether it's through video classrooms or whatever, that you need a proctor in the room, obviously, but at the same token, that there'd be something there that would allow a student to take an elective that is offered down county that they're really interested in. Because sometimes that is the single most important thing to that student to turn on the light bulb, to make them desire to go and seek a specific career or whatever, to fill out their education because they're interested in it. So that's one of our concerns up here. We may be stable in houses, but we're not stable in population, and we continue to grow. And we've been doing this over the past several years at the elementary school. Stony Springs has come online. Brightwell Crossing has come online. We have the Reserve at Brightwell and all these others. And we still have infill that's going to be going on. Not in any great extreme, like Jim said. We're not going to get 1,000 houses, but we do have, 150? Approximately more that are going to be built. And I'm sure that, and also, there's a demographic edge to this. As you can tell, I have gray hair. Well, it's silver. Gray is not, silver is worth more than gray. But anyways, there's the population here is trending. On my street alone, there's at least 10, well, I would say in my area, there's at least 10 people, including myself, who are retired, and no children. And those houses are going to slowly turn over.
Right.
And they're going to turn over to new families, young families, because those homes will be affordable to them compared to some of the other homes that are here in Poolesville. So you've got that coming online as well. So we're very concerned about that. Thank you.
And that really goes back to what Ms. McGuire was saying about not just looking at the macro projections, but looking at the micro projections across the clusters and across the communities. And that's absolutely correct. And certainly your point is very well taken and absolutely right on about the acceleration of the digital world providing more opportunities for students. But the bottom line is the students here need the same opportunities as any other student in the county. And that's something the board that I work for and that I take very, very seriously, because access precedes achievement. If you don't get access to something, you can't do it. That's what it comes down to.
So, real quick, again, thanks for coming out this evening. We appreciate it. As a parent in Poolesville, having put 4 children through the Poolesville school system, my first graduating in 1999, my last graduating in 2012, having been a PTA president of almost all 4 schools in our cluster, and now here sitting as a commissioner. I could not be any more grateful for the schools that we have in Poolesville and what they gave to my children and my family. And of course, like Jerry, I have spent many years advocating for our community and for our schools. One of the things that I'm curious about is, has there ever been consideration given to realigning the boundary of what feeds into this Poolesville cluster? Because I think that, looking into the future, we certainly don't want to jeopardize what we have. And with the demographics, changing from time to time, I'm curious if that's ever been considered. You were just talking about trying to decrease the number of some of the larger schools. And has this ever been considered? And what are your feelings on that?
I can't speak to prior to my arrival here, but my impression has been that the cluster has been pretty sacred. And in this last CIP, one of the points I made to the board, and they said at that point they agreed, that we have to look at those cluster boundaries across the system, and some of them have said that also, to balance out and to use the facilities that we have, because
Right.
all of us know that just to your east, there is a lot of population pressure, and they may not
Right.
move within a block of this building, but certainly there is opportunity to provide schooling for students as that growth moves west out of Clarksburg and across 270. And so that is something we're going to have to think about.
My reason for asking is because if the consideration were given to realign some of that, and we were to bring more kids into the school, then the possibility of us once again becoming more important in numbers to do the renovations to our existing school may become more prevalent.
Absolutely, capacity is a driving force in what we're dealing with right now. And if it makes the most sense to deal with the capacity issue by increasing a school adjacent to that cluster, then I really think Montgomery County Public Schools and Montgomery County are going to have to look at that as I look at all of the county, because, and I absolutely am not trying to say that you're not unique, because you are very unique. So is part of the eastern part of the county that I visit. Damascus is unique. Part of the southwestern corner of the county is unique. And we're going to have to think about those things in the coming years.
Well, to piggyback, after the turn of the century, and it still sounds strange when I say that, but we advocated, Liz Smith, who was cluster coordinator at the time, and myself advocated, before the Clarksburg boundary cluster boundaries were set, because we knew once they were drawn that basically it's political suicide, and a lot of frustration on part of the parents if you go to change the boundary. And we were told, no, we don't need to do this. Because one of the efforts was to pump more kids into Monocacy Elementary so that we could get more kids into John Poole Middle School. And we were told, no, that can't happen. And we don't still to this day understand, because what we were talking about is just moving the boundary to the western edge of I-270. Now I understand you're going to build an elementary school on the western side of I-270, which then, doesn't help Monocacy Elementary. And I know when we were fighting that fight to keep Monocacy open, there were parents in the Clarksburg cluster who were willing to take their kids to Monocacy and pick them up. And we were still told no.
And I appreciate what you said about just the Clarksburg boundary. I think it's important in that context. I do just want to clarify that capacity is one component of just what we're dealing with in the CIP, but everything starts with the condition of the facility. That's the idea for what we're doing going forward. That doesn't change. The flexibility built into the program would be to, when possible, look to marry what programmatic elements might exist that we want to pair with that facility project as well as capacity. And that's just something that we can't do currently, but I do just want to assure you that capacity is not the key to facility work here in Poolesville or any place for that matter. It's really just a mechanism to help those dollars go as far as we can. So I just want to assure you.
And I do appreciate that, because I would hope that capacity would be secondary to clearly the condition of the building. And having actually attended Poolesville High School myself, as well as put 4 children through there, and having attended other schools within the county, Walter Johnson, Annapolis Senior High School, I see what has been done to other schools, and I see what's been done to our school. So certainly, we're all fighting the same battle for the same thing, and ultimately that is the condition of our school for our children now and for our future children.
And Dr. Smith had just asked me to explain, in the current structure that we have, the queue, that long-standing queue of the RevX projects, sits over here, and you could be, for example, number 5 on the queue, and over here you need a capacity project because you're just growing and exploding. And what we find ourselves in right now is we're building these additions over here independent of the fact that several years down the road we might do a RevX, and that just doesn't seem to make sense that we can't connect the two. And so the policy changes are designed to help that problem. The issues of assessing facilities on a regular basis, that comes into play totally irrespective of capacity. So I just want to point out the current state that we have, and one of the challenges we have right now, and I can think of several schools where that's the case, where we need to do an addition. It doesn't make sense to do addition when a couple of years down the road we're going to do a major capital project. You should have a mechanism to link the two. So that's one of the pieces here, but by no means the only piece.
I can appreciate that. Thanks for the explanation on it. If you want to keep moving to question number 3, and then we'll get a couple questions from the audience. Some of this is overlapping, obviously.
Poolesville is one of the top performing schools in the state and nation. And that's an asset that we need to make sure is sustained and move forward. So as I've said before, certainly we don't want to lose any of our assets, any of the things that are working well. The goal is to keep what is working well and to improve in areas where we need to improve across the county. And so I don't see pressure from, Down County Consortium, Northeast Consortium, Walter Johnson. I don't see any of those as being things that would put pressure on Poolesville, because geography and population are too great. There are too many people and the distance is too great. So we have to provide service in our communities. We can't say, well, we have, if suddenly the population of East County drops and Paint Branch has a lot of seats, there's no way to adjust that across. It's not possible. And that is one place where you are particularly unique. From Blake to Paint Branch, you can make some adjustments. From Springbrook, you're not gonna make adjustments from Poolesville across the county in that way. It just doesn't work. And so I don't see any changes in any foreseeable future coming in that way. And like I said, I don't want to speak too far out because we don't know what 10 years, 15, 20 years might look like. But right now, I just don't see it. I don't see it. It's shifting.
And I think the driving force behind that question is the funds that are in the CIP towards the Crown and towards Crown High School, and the worry amongst our residents that somehow that it's close enough that it could be a force that could potentially drive away from our Poolesville High School.
When you talk about that, Essie, it's a
Certainly, I think one thing that's important to remember about Crown is that we are envisioning that Crown will do a number of things, but one of them is to take pressure off of other schools that are already over capacity in the area. Rockville, Peaks Orchard, I'm not going to hit all the clusters, I don't want to single anybody out, but again, there's a, thank you, Gaithersburg, there's a number, Richard Montgomery, there are like 4 or 5, I think we even have Northwest and on the list as well. My point is that there are a number of schools that are experiencing those capacity pressures at the high school level right in that area. So Crown really sort of sits in the middle of those clusters more than it does have a negative impact here in Poolesville.
If anything, you should drive population north and west, because that's where we have a lot of overcrowded schools.
And I just think the question has come from our residents in terms of the closeness of that major facility potentially being built and potentially drawing away from Poolesville, not students, but programs.
Yeah, I don't see that. I mean, certainly funding will continue to be an issue for everyone. All the clusters, and if a new high school is built at Crown, then because the population will have to be there. So it depends on. We don't see any chance it won't be there that far out, given where we are in the actual students. But in 1980, they didn't see any chance they were going to be losing students by the tens of thousands over time. So, funding will be an issue for the county for the foreseeable future, in my judgment, my opinion, in terms of looking at how it all fits together.
And I appreciate that. And look, Jane Liren is one of our leaders of our cluster, and I know she's chomping at the bit, and I love hearing her talk. So I'll just give her a minute here. No, you're my absolute favorite.
Just a little bit about Crown. I want you to tell me if I'm wrong. The thing with Crown, this is something called a catchment area. And the Poolesville cluster, well, not the global, but for SMACs and communities, has something called a catchment area. Clarksburg, Damascus, QO, Northwest, Magruder, Seneca Valley, and Gaithersburg. I hope I'm not leaving any out. What you have to understand, and tell me if I'm wrong, Crown is supposed to relieve pressure from Gaithersburg High School, which is actually my home cluster. I live in Gaithersburg. This is my home country. From QO, and it's also supposed to relieve pressure from Luton and from RM. Luton and RM are not part of the Poolesville catchment. We don't get kids from SMACs and humanities from that area. They go to Blair. So, I mean, you're basically, it's Gaithersburg cluster and QO cluster. That's the only one that it really affects. And so, like I said, it's called the catchment area. And in fact, I know people at RM are kind of unhappy because they're not going to get their extension because part of it has to be the Crown. So I just want to put that out there. And I live in Gaithersburg, and it is a long drive. And I know a lot of kids in my part of the world that, they do drive out here. But, again, Crown is not an issue because 2 of the schools don't even feed into Poolesville. That's my first thing. My second thing is Wonka thing. The policy management committee meeting that Mrs. O'Neill is having tomorrow, there were 2 policies you put up here. I think it was FAA and FRK. FAP, okay. This is very self-serving, but what can we do? What can we submit in order to get our priorities working that policy, which I understand has not been put forward?
That's a great question. And just the board's policy process is such that the board will put out public comment, so you'll have an opportunity to comment on it as soon as it moves forward. And so that I would anticipate being later in the spring, if not May or June of the policy will go out. You can of course write in at any time, Ms. O'Neill.
So like we can say, we haven't actually assessed this, we could put that into the policy, the priorities or placement for school. Okay.
You could suggest that, absolutely.
Absolutely, you get at any time always to write into the board, but there will be a formal public comment
Okay.
period.
All right.
Just this, the last question here, I think I talked about just a minute ago with respect to capacity. I think it would be helpful just for Ms. McGuire to just put just a little more context there around the key facility indicators and how we're envisioning moving away from the old process of the fact assessment to the new, what we call the KFI model, where we'll be ongoing, assessing schools in an ongoing fashion, and what that could mean for schools in Poolesville as well as just all over the county.
So thank you, and I think, a number of concerns that have been raised and that are listed here in the question also indicate, again, sort of the time that has elapsed in these conversations about the renovations. And I think that in and of itself is one of the features of the old process and the list and the queue that we want to be able to re-envision with our new process. While the queue in a lot of ways had a predictability and an order to it, it also did have a locking in quality. And the assessments that were done around those particular sets of schools were not across all schools. They were done for certain criteria, largely related to age. And so again, that created sort of its own categories of when schools were assessed and how they were placed in that queue. And then of course the queue was subject to funding. And that was, as we discussed, that was another issue that became increasingly challenging over time. What we want to do is be able to, again, really just integrate, rather than having a separate block of dedicated programmatic funding allocated and then the rest of the CIP operating separately. We really want to integrate those processes. And so we're going to be taking the approach of looking at our facilities across all facilities. And we're going to look at what we're calling key facility indicators, which are really a way to identify what are the key elements of a building and a facility that we need to understand in order to understand how that building is functioning, how it's operating from a facility standpoint, as well as from a programmatic and educational standpoint, and then what projects can we bring to that facility that really will be impactful and that will most benefit that student body. That approach, we think, will be able to, again, implement across our system of projects, from the systemic replacement projects, additions in capacity, and then major capital projects that bring these things together. In that process, we absolutely know that we need to attend to our aging facilities, and we have a large number of them, and Poolesville is certainly in that grouping. It's in that list, it's in that group that we've identified. We just need to be able to have a flexible way to assess what do we need to do to bring a positive impact to this facility, how and when can we schedule that, and how can we put that within the entire continuum of our capital planning priorities that we need to accomplish.
And before we get into talking about what we're trying to still get out of this, I appreciate you addressing that because there's a scorecard, right? And the scorecard has said for a number of years that Poolesville's on a list, and we have a position on that list. We're talking about the high school. And being on that list and then having not only not being on the list, but the list really kind of lose its relevance, that's a big deal for everybody here. And I know that the other schools can fall into that category, but I think one of the reasons why this room's full and why the room in front of the school board has been full every single time has been both the de-emphasization of the facts system, and then also too the really lack of a future, like where's the list and are we on the list, and when will it be a list that we'll be on? And that's really worrisome for the community.
Well, I was just going to say that the great trepidation going into this from the very beginning was exactly what you just said.
Right.
Was can we work with our community, whether it's Poolesville or another community, to work with us over this period of transition, get the feedback, the public comments, so that we can come out on the other side with something much stronger and robust because of just the ongoing delay. I mean, one of the other sides of this was for year after year, Poolesville or Damascus continued to just be delayed and delayed and delayed. So the idea was to get out of that cycle. But in the absence of the new cycle, there is some uncertainty. And we recognize this tightrope that we've been walking, and we've been asking our communities to continue to walk with us while we go through the process, and we know how uncertain that is.
And I guess as a parent from raising kids in this community for so long, in 1996, 7, 8, 9, I rode that bus down to Annapolis and fought for the same things we're fighting for today. And so, you know, to go on that walk and to continue to walk and walk and walk and walk, and then all of a sudden it feels like you fell over the edge. You walked so far, we fell right off the list. Imagine for our community what that feels like.
And so that's why we want to make sure that as we go through this policy process, that we come back several months from now with certainty, with clarity, rather, if not certainty, clarity for how we move forward. I'm glad you mentioned Annapolis, because unfolding here as we've been addressing these issues locally in Montgomery County and here in Poolesville, there's been a commission at the state level called the Knott Commission, chaired by Senator Martin Knott, that has looked at state construction funding. And there's been tremendous push over the last few years in Annapolis to completely rethink the way that the state is approaching the capital budget for local education agencies, precisely because of the issues that you just described. It's the delays and just the funding cliff that we find ourselves in. So I think this is on everyone's mind across the state. We're really fortunate here in Montgomery County that we're one of the few districts that locally forward funds our capital projects. That's just really unusual and almost unheard of around the state. So we have the ability to do that here, but we're running out of that space because of competing pressures in the CIP. So I completely hear what you're saying, and that's just what we're walking through now.
Okay, I have a couple of observations. One, having grown in upstate New York and traveled on a bus 45 minutes that had K through 12 students, I don't think I'm that damaged. I wasn't traumatized. My son went to Troma Park Middle School magnet program. He got up with me and left here, Poolesville, at 6 in the morning, got back about 5:30 in the afternoon, 5:30 when I got home from work. And I asked him one day, I said, is there any problems with that? And he said, no. He says, I sleep on the way down, I do my homework on the way back, and I can do anything I down well please, in the evening. So I don't find that as a problem for kids coming out here. And especially if they want the program and they want to be part of something really special, people are willing to sacrifice, number one. Number two, kids are really resilient. And then I have a question here. Another observation is one, I am vice president of the Montgomery County chapter of Maryland Municipal League. And at our legislative dinner, we invited the Board of Ed. And I pitched two things to who was there at the meeting, along with many of the county legislative delegation from Montgomery County. And we pitched two things from them. One, bring back more money to Montgomery County. We were told several years ago, when I asked one state senator, are we going to get money this year? And they told me it was going to be Baltimore's year. Well, Baltimore is like the astronomical black hole. Money goes in, no one knows where it goes. And they said next year will be your year. It wasn't our year. It still hasn't been our year. And we have been advocating. And I've been pitched this to a joint chapter meeting with the Prince George's County Maryland Municipal League chapter and the Montgomery County chapter, and everybody from PG County, they were nodding their heads just as the Montgomery County people were. We are willing to go and we are willing to help, and as Val said, we have done it in the past. So, and the other thing is we understand that the state, when they pass this thing for the gambling revenue, that they are taking that gambling revenue and they are putting it in the general fund, and they're using it to supplant state dollars to education versus supplement state dollars to education. So we would hope that you, the board, the county council, the county executive, and our delegation would make Annapolis aware. And there was an article on the 23rd of December in the Baltimore Sun about Delegate McIntosh and Senator Conway will push for a constitutional amendment to put a lockbox around education funds so it can't be stolen and used for other purposes. Okay, that's my third observation, and I know I'm probably wearing on you, but here's the real question. Several years ago, I attended a forum sponsored by Council Member Roger Berliner down at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. One of the proposals for obtaining new funding for schools was dual use, and in turn, you would obtain funds from different agencies to build a facility attached to a school. As an example, Poolesville High School doesn't have a county-supported community center, and we need a new high school. Would you consider, Dr. Smith, supporting an initiative that could possibly obtain funds from different county and state agencies that could build a combined Poolesville High School and a community center?
I would absolutely support the exploration of that idea. Absolutely. I looked at it when I worked in Calvert County and visited such a facility in Prince George's County where they had built a school and created a community center and a school and some government facilities all together in the same facility. I think, frankly, we're going to have to do that in the future, not just in Poolesville, but in our business. We're going to have to change the way we view this when we leave buildings, unoccupied for a good share of the time. Even if they're used much of the summer, they're still unoccupied a good share of the time, and I think that is going to have to change. So I'd absolutely support the exploration of how we could do that and work with the county government. I've talked about that with them, about ways of thinking about schools in a different way. And if we had a community that was interested in such a thing and to work on it, then that's simply more than half the battle. Because if the community comes out and says, no, we would never agree to that, it often just dies right there. And so I think it's a very exciting idea.
And I would just add that there is, and you're probably aware, there is a county committee, the Montgomery County Co-Location Committee, and we serve on that, and we have talked about that very concept of co-locating different services. We've even tried to think about a public-private partnership, and so I think it's a very interesting idea.
And let me raise one other issue. I also happen to be on the Maryland Municipal League Home Emergency Preparedness Ad Hoc Committee. And one of the things that Jake Runnell, who is the president of the Maryland Municipal League, who is a council member from Newmarket, he lost his son in a car accident, which we believe, I think, was caused by alcohol. But there have been several one of his big things is a push to raise opioid awareness within Maryland, throughout Maryland. And I spoke with him, and he talked about, I remember the DARE program. And I spoke with one principal one time, and they said that they didn't think it was really worth it, that it put something in front of students that wasn't on their horizon or on their radar, and therefore might lead them to explore. But there was an article in Scientific American, September 2014, that there's a new DARE program out. Because I guess the other one had some disparaging remarks and people said it wasn't really working. But this one, according to this article in Scientific American, which you can have, basically says the program's been revised and they believe it's working. And with the things we're facing now, with the opioid epidemic, and we had a young man, he wasn't a teenager, he was a young man, who his mother went into his room and found him with a needle and he was dead due to heroin overdose. I think maybe we need to relook this problem and in the school system and find money either through the schools, with the county police, or whomever, the state, to bring this program back and start putting it out to our kids, for them to understand experimentation you think may be all right, but it can lead to a path which will, one, create a dependency for the rest of your life, number one. Two, it will get you fired from any job. You will not be considered for any job, especially good paying jobs, because you need a clearance and you need to be trustworthy. And if you don't have those, you can forget it. So I offer this up to you and for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Getting back into program, I appreciate that here because it's very, very important for our community.
No question about that. You guys have answered most of the questions that are on our question list. We appreciate you coming prepared, staying focused on the Poolesville cluster, giving us the background information that we need. It's been good for our community to hear it. Communication is critical. That's big for all of us. We feel a little bit isolated up here. You've now actually been here as many times as our actual county council members have been here. You have time for one trip, so we appreciate you coming up and being a part of our community tonight. And before I turn it over to a few questions from our audience members, I want to say that don't worry, our closing question is going to be, what more can we do? So we'll plan on leaving it on that, and then I'll leave it up to the residents if you have questions that you can fill in some of the blanks as well. I just ask that you stand, say your name, and then speak clearly, and then sit back down and let them answer, if that's okay. Go ahead, right up front.
My name is Austin Spandiari. I was very appreciative of your presence here tonight and your comments and talking back and forth. One thing that I'd like a little more follow-up on is on the programs and access to programs. One person on the board mentioned maybe a video capability to expand the amount of programs available because of resources being shared among the community. And then I heard you, I think, start to talk about why it's not going to happen. So maybe I misunderstood. So if you could explain how we can get communities that would impact the whole community, the whole Montgomery County, remotely, so that students who are interested in special studies can get access to those studies.
If I wasn't clear, I apologize. I think it has to happen. And the digital world that we now live in makes it very possible. And frankly, the school system hasn't spent a lot of energy around that. That's what I found when I arrived here, is that there hasn't been a lot of energy. So absolutely, I think it has to happen, especially at the middle and high school level, but certainly there are options that feel like that.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. One of your most treasured employees is in the back row raising his question. Do you want to identify yourself as who you are in real life?
My name is Dan Savino. I live here in Poolesville. I have kids in the cluster. May or may not be an MCPS employee.
Hold on, let me go to the staff director.
I have one quick question, and then a totally unrelated concern or question. You mentioned the security vestibule was in your plans for Poolesville High School. Does that include the recognition of the fact that there are two separate buildings that are disconnected from each other, and there's a security issue with the second building and egress going between the two buildings? So I appreciate the fact that that came up on the slide, a security overhaul. Does it include the two buildings?
It does not include the two buildings in that regard. If we're talking about a vestibule in the primary building, what we do need to do is less from a facilities standpoint through the Division of Construction, but more through our Department of School Safety and Security, work with the team at Poolesville to look at just operationally how we address the fact that we have this. And I know that we want to localize this to Poolesville. We do have several facilities around the county in a similar situation where we have to take a look at just the security practices in place. The report that was issued in September, an update on security practices in our high schools, does speak to the need to do this not just from a facility standpoint, but just practices and what practices are in place. We have to look at the staffing. We have to look at other features. So all of that is a part of the security review that we're going through. We hope to bring some ideas to the high school principals in the next month or two to vet. But the vestibule itself, it really speaks to the purpose.
My second concern was, for many years now, we've been opening high schools, middle schools, particularly high schools, that's kind of what I've paid more attention to, that open over capacity. They open that way. You're talking about, alleviating Gaithersburg. Gaithersburg's paint is barely dry. Northwest is a younger school compared to Poolesville, almost every place is, but Northwest was built and then additions were put onto it. Clarksburg was open over capacity. Almost every school we open is overcapacity. But the biggest concern that comes right back to the community and the new shift from the FACT score to capacity issues being kind of the primary thing is we don't see an end in sight there, where if we're consistently opening schools that are over capacity on the day the doors open, Poolesville, and then back to the original concern is we're off the list and you're asking us to walk this wire with you. And if we don't see schools that are open, able to even, they open needing an addition. So now that we're focusing more on capacity issues, and I appreciate the fact that you need a place for kids to stay, right? That's a real issue. But if we're opening and they need an addition right away, we'll never be on that list. And so there's something wrong with those plans.
That is a really good point you raised. I do just want to emphasize again that there's capacity on the one hand, and then there's aging infrastructure. And the starting point for Poolesville is the facility condition. The issue that you're describing is really the fine line of how much to build and when to build. And I talked a little while ago about the enrollment wave hitting middle school and really plateauing in elementary. So one of the questions that we always have to ask when we build schools and plan is we don't want to build it to the point that 10 years from now it's going to be underutilized. And then we're sitting with empty space and money that could have gone to another project was sunk in a project because there's a temporary overcrowding situation. And that's really the balancing act. There are some very legitimate cases, and we're dealing with Wilson Winds right now. From the day it opened, it was overcrowded. We have a new school coming online in Clarksburg as a result soon to address that overcrowding, and that's one that's just continuing to grow. The board is looking at this, and we're looking at this, and I think the new Richard Montgomery Elementary School number 5 is a really good example where we made a recommendation to, instead of waiting to complete what we call the shell, we've been building buildings now with the outside structure completed, but not investing the $2 or $3 million extra to complete the inside 4 or 6 classrooms that we may need a few years from now to divert those dollars somewhere else. That's just how tight the CIP is, that we want to squeeze every $3 million and put it somewhere else. The board made a decision on our recommendation to not do that with Richard Montgomery in recognition of what you just said, the new Richard Montgomery number 5. So it's a constant balancing act, and even more, it speaks to the point of why we need to look at our enrollment projections to make sure that methodology is as tight as can be. So I hear what you're saying, and I agree with what you're saying, and we just have to continue to find ways to make the most of that.
And one of the issues is that, and I hear what you're saying, that the capacity is one issue, and the infrastructure is another issue. But to put it quite frankly, the capacity issue in Montgomery County continues to derail the infrastructure issue for Poolesville and other schools. And so although they are two separate issues, we do keep getting derailed based on capacity issues.
Well, so capacity certainly is a growing, has been a continually growing factor. But part of our challenge with the funding is not only to build capacity, but to also build our aging infrastructure. And again, what we're looking for is a more flexible way to address that, because we've been trying to deal with it in a large static block. So the shift is not only a shift to capacity, it's also a shift to our systemic projects that address replacement. It's a shift to our building improvement projects. It's a shift to trying to bring a lot of our schools up to the educational specifications that Mr. Adams was talking about, that we really want to be able to address those spaces. It's not only capacity or, it is both, but we have to have both working together. And that's where we just needed a different approach to how we deal with facility infrastructure. I absolutely know the program has been delayed, and it was delayed for a number of schools over a number of years because there wasn't enough funding to do large-scale projects as frequently as we needed to, not only because of capacity.
Okay, Rebecca, and then Joy, I think you had your hand up, and then...
Hi, I'm Rebecca Munster. I'm trying to understand a little bit this process, because we're talking at a pretty high level. And I have my little one is going to start kindergarten next year, and I never imagined she would not go to a brand new high school. And I got to go to Brandon High School, I got to Consortium High School. And when you look at, let's take Consortium High School, for example, now it's been enough years, you've got an aging infrastructure there. I mean, I'd like to think it's not, because I'm only, 25, but it's an aging infrastructure. So I'm having a hard time understanding how you are going to balance those and how a school like Poolesville, because I can't imagine the condition of that school by the time my little one gets there. I cannot imagine. So I'm having a hard time, since there's only so many dollars, understanding. Can you give me more details about this process and how this process is going to, because the school, you could put some lipstick on a pig at Consortium, you really can't do that at Poolesville High School anymore. We're getting to the point you can't do that anymore. So help me understand how this process is going to address that.
And so part of what we really do need to do are look at the components and look specifically at what needs to be addressed. And at a certain point, you're right, it does tip over to a major project or a larger scale rebuild. But that's the analysis that we need to do, and we'll do it. We'll do it for Poolesville, and we'll do it for the other schools that we know are in that, again, that same cohort.
So what's the timeline for
The timeline is that we're going to be carrying out those assessments over the next few months. We're going to be needing to bring that back in terms of the next year's capital improvements program. Again, though, what we're going to be looking at are ways to address those through our projects. We're not going to be building out a long, extensive list again, because we do want to be able to flexibly address things as they arise and in a more timely fashion. One of the problems with the 20-year queue was even if you know you're in year 19, it's still 19 years away. What we really would like to know is what can we do now that will address this cohort of schools? And that's what we're looking at. So the time frame for assessments is very close in. We're going to be doing that again over the next few months. And as the board works through this policy process, we'll be able to bring some more clarity to what our next steps will be after that. The next round of how those first projects are going to play out will be known shortly in the next round of the CIP. We'll be scheduling the CIP in increments as we go, rather than trying to map out 20 years into the future, which we know just doesn't give us the opportunity to respond to things as they change in front of us.
It all still feels very, very far away.
And there's a lot of...
You say that we are trying to move away from a 20-year plan, but it still feels like it'll end up being a 20-year plan by the time we get through the assessment, we figure out where we fit, and then the whole process to do any type of build out.
What's most disappointing, and sorry to use that word, is that the assessment hasn't been done yet. So is that what so the assessment hasn't even been done to the needs of Poolesville High School?
So this is the sequencing of the policy that I talked about earlier. Policy FKB specifically enumerates the fact assessment process. So before we do the assessment process using a new framework, we have to have the policy change in place. And that's the sequencing issue here. So we've spent the last 18 months to 2 years fleshing out a new approach to this. We bring it to the policy management committee. Hopefully that goes through and changes to the policy are such that we can then proceed with the assessment process.
And in addition to that, though, we know we're not starting from scratch, right? I mean, we know our schools, we know a lot of things about our schools, we know the ages of some of these different components. So we are bringing that information that we have internally. The assessment piece is really to just connect all of those dots and to be sure that we know exactly what's happening on the ground. But we're not starting from a blank slate. We're starting from information that we have.
And I bring that up because I think it's really important to our residents and our parents that they feel as though you recognize the issues at Poolesville High School, and not just from a bigger perspective, just like the other schools within our county. But it's really important to us as parents that you actually know in your minds the issues that we as parents and our children are dealing with. Okay?
Yeah, I would say that then, and I want to keep moving here, so we'll get to our questions. I'll get you in a second. I'm working across this way. Part of the questions are that we asked our residents for questions. Fully half of them talked about that their son or daughter sits on the floor and eats their lunch, and then they're worried about their future sons and daughters coming through and sitting on the floor and eating their lunch. And then there's obviously some very sticky points inside Poolesville High School where there's a lot of traffic, et cetera. That's was, as I was just reviewing the questions from our residents, those were big topics for our people.
Well, one of the things, Jim, I do want to mention, I'm not sure that you are aware that one of our local churches has created a program called Just Lunch, St. Peter's. And the reason they have done it is for a multitude of reasons, but the program went from 10 students to over 100 children come from Poolesville High School every day to that program. And I worked it on Tuesdays for 6-7 months. And I spoke to the high school students. And the reason they're coming is because they have a chair to sit in at St. Peter's, instead of sitting on the floor to eat their lunch or sitting in the parking lot, in nicer weather to eat their lunch. And, as parents, that's a terrible feeling to think that your children is sitting on a floor. That is, that's hard. That's hard.
And such a good point, and something we're hearing actually at a lot of our high schools. And one of the things on the slide that cut out that Mr. Adams was speaking to, which I have right here, is examples of areas to review and assess immediately at Poolesville. And one of them is core space. And we have to look at the core space, meaning cafeteria, media center, areas where auditorium, thank you. And we have this issue at a number of high schools now because most high schools have moved to a single lunch period. And the schools, no cafeteria will ever be built to handle 2,000 kids in a single lunch period. And the educational specifications for our high schools are really designed for a fraction of that and built on a model where you're going to have several lunch periods in a row. Now that almost all high schools in Montgomery County have moved to a single lunch period, it creates tremendous operational issues, the ones that you just described. So we're actually forming a work group, not led by facilities, but actually from our food services division to say, what is it that we can do differently in our high schools to address this issue? Not to put aside the core space problem, we have to deal with that, but we also have just legitimate operational issues. Can we put kiosks in different parts of the schools, grab and go lunch options? We've heard lots of stories of kids getting through the cafeteria line. This is a volume issue, and we need to unclog that.
Yeah, Martin, real quick, just a quick question. So I've heard you say that you don't foresee any changes to the cluster or to the magnet program in the foreseeable future. What would you define roughly as a foreseeable future? Like, where do you envision 10 years from now? Like, Poolesville High School.
Since you asked me a direct question, I'll give you a direct answer. I think there will be more students in Poolesville 10 years from now. Because if you look at the growth in Montgomery County, barring some very unexpected reason why many people will leave, it's growing up the county. And in fact, I have a map in my office that I look at all the time. I sit and face it. And there is a kind of diamond-shaped growth in the county, and that's going to continue northward, and it's going to continue east and west, and that's where there's space. So 10 years from now, if I were to bet some of my own money, I predict you'll have more kids here than you do now, and more capacity in schools, barring some really strange thing where the whole county would start losing people. And I don't see any other choice.
And if we don't have incredibly greater numbers, 10 years from now, do you see the magnet program being here? And
absolutely, those are the sorts of programs that we want to expand and have more seats across the county, not fewer. And so I don't see any. If you look at what we've done to our elementary programs, we've been expanding them into more schools in the outer ring of the county and parts of the county where we had fewer of those sorts of programs. I don't see us moving away from any of those sorts of programs, but expanding them more so that we can provide more opportunity to more kids.
we may not have the number of homes like Jerry was talking about, everything, but I think that the community is very engaged, and they're going to be the squeaky wheel until something gets done. So
yeah, and with respect,
we do appreciate you being here.
Just to piggyback on that growth, we had 850 applicants. I think Dina could vouch for this. 450 magnet seats. So I can understand we're growing, but if we only can accept 150, we had more capacity, we had a new school, we might be able to accept 250. But anyways,
Over here, Joy, go ahead. I'm going through the audience, and let's just try to keep it moving. You got it.
My name is Joy Zucker-Teeman. I've lived here in Poolesville for going on 13 years now. I was not a mom when I first moved here. My youngest will enter kindergarten next year. My oldest is currently in third grade. I've been part of this fight before I became a mom, and it is very frightening that even tonight, we don't really have a clear idea of whether or not our school is going to get significant improvements or replaced. So with that as a comment, I have a few notes. Number one, the overcrowding issue, as we have all stated, is a constant growing problem in almost every single school. There are such things as temporary classrooms and trailers that can be put on those locations to solve their current problem, whether it be a 3-year problem, a 10-year problem, whatever. It doesn't take millions of dollars to satisfy that. But you have a serious infrastructure problem with a 64-year-old high school that is getting older by the day. The fact that my son's current nursery school teacher was a student at this high school cannot believe that the majority of that building is in the same condition as it was when she was a student nearly 40 years ago. Speaks to the fact that we have infrastructure problems everywhere. Water, electrical, the layout itself, the safety and security, the lack of fire, the lack of sprinkler systems. It is not going away. We have encapsulated asbestos. I don't want my child attending a school that has a threat of a fire, let alone a threat of asbestos release. So hopefully I am only ever here as a parent and not in my other capacity, because I don't ever want to have to cover this from the news side, which is what I do when I'm not the parent. But my reality and my fear here is that we go back to the fact that we have a growth issue no matter where you go in this county, and we're looking at a new structure that, as you said, has taken the 18 months that Superintendent Smith has been in this role to reallocate the resources and say that the model has changed. But the model, as it currently stands, does not help us as a town. It doesn't help my 4.5-year-old. It doesn't help their junior high school student. And the foreseeable future says it's not changing for us. So as we look at this, it has to be a combination of things. Jerry brought up the dual use. We've often asked the questions internally, and I know I covered this when we were covering the building of Blair High School many years ago when I was in the newsroom. There are constantly bids going out for the design of a new school. There should be an A, B, and a C model, and based on capacity and square footage, it should be this model, so that monies can be spent where monies need to be spent, and therefore building happens as fast as it needs to happen. And hopefully, especially in the areas where the schools are just not necessarily safe, conducive to proper learning, and everything that a school should be. And when you look at a 64-year-old school, regardless of everything you presented tonight, and I appreciate it because it really did give me a lot of clarity on things I did not know, but I still come back to a 64-year-old school that is getting older by the day and does not meet our needs today. It will not meet them tomorrow, and it will not meet them next month. So as families who've made purchase decisions, have chosen jobs to stay in this area for the sake of what our school does offer us, we asked this initially, it was in the questions, and I know Superintendent Smith addressed this before you actually went through the 4 questions on our sheets. We need to know about the viability of the magnet program staying here, and Poolesville always having a high school within the town limits. And to that end, we need added to that a new building. You want to take it section by section, fine, but we can't keep band-aiding this building. We cannot do it. Dan referenced one thing about the fact that we have 2 separate structures, and the specifics didn't necessarily address that. It is so much farther than that, and there are so many of our parents here who would tell you, who would add on, we're begging you, because our kids need this. This town needs this, and it can't just be, we're reevaluating. It really cannot. And I'm sorry if I'm upsetting some of the people who've been part of this process for 20 plus years, but we as a community, and the community's viability needs that school, and it needs a new school.
So I just want to say, I think what you said was really well said, and thank you for what you said. The RevX program, the model that you talked about that hasn't been serving Poolesville, was started developed initially in the late 80s and codified in the early 90s. It is a institution unto itself here in Montgomery County. And so making changes to it does take a little bit of time. And if we don't make changes to it, which is what we're talking about here, and I don't have the numbers directly in front of me, that's what I whispered to Adrian a minute ago, but I believe Poolesville's initial project was scheduled for the early 2000s. And we're now in the year 2018. And if we didn't change the model, there's Wooten and Damascus ahead of But still, we've been waiting here for at least probably 16 years, and we said to ourselves, and I think the board said, and I think the committee said, something has to change. And it actually started with when Ms. McGuire, she was on the county council staff, and you may remember the Office of Legislative Oversight released a report that talked about the REDX program. That was the catalyst for looking at this. But it's really hard to change an institution that's been in place for that time. So we've been walking through this, and I understand the uncertainty on the other side, but your comments really spoke to exactly why we need to make changes to the program. And we know that coming out of the policy process and the KFI process, that we have to make sure that Poolesville is well cared for, and we know that. So
is there a way, as you say that, to grandfather Poolesville in there so that we're not necessarily on the back end waiting yet again? Because we have so much of what we all are here about is the fact that we've been part of this for so long, and we've been sort of sliding along with this. It'll be 2 more years, it'll be 2012, it'll be 2014, it'll be 2020, it'll be 2024, and we're still waiting. Is there, it's grandfather us in, please find a way. This town, I think I said it. Grandfather was in.
Incredibly sympathetic to what you're saying. I am. We can't grandfather anyone in outside of the board policy though, because that would just cause problems for the board, for us, and for you, with many of your extended neighbors across the county. So what we can do though is say that we've set aside a substantial amount of capacity and a substantial amount of money for systemic improvements, many things we've been talking about tonight, and aging infrastructure updates for program, for safety, all of those things. And we can say we're going to keep those two amounts of money separate. So this amount of money over here gets protected to a much greater degree than it has in the past. And that's what's happened, is that in the past, we had it sitting here, but the capacity just overwhelmed it. And so what I can tell you and what I'm confident about is by having these pots of money in this way, we can come back after a policy is written and say systemic projects and renovations for program, safety, ADA, everything else can get done in spite of the fact that somebody 15 miles away has a serious capacity problem, which they do now, or they don't now, or they will, or they won't. But it is. So I understand your point, but by separating them and putting more in capacity, we can say this money is off limits. I can't grandfather Poolesville, because the board ultimately has to vote on it, and they're my boss. But when I came in for this job, they were about 8 or 10 months into this process. And I went through everything that summer. Because I've been in the principalship, the superintendency, the state superintendency long enough to know these are among the most emotional conversations we can have in school buildings. And I think it's interesting, your children were 99 through 2012. Our 5 children were 2000 through 2009. And they've been redistricted, they've had their school delayed, one went to a brand new high school, one went to the old, a 60-year-old school. So I understand all that, but by doing this, there is a much greater chance that Poolesville will get taken care of in the next 6 years in a substantial way than if we stay with the old system.
So can I just ask, is that pot of money that you're referring to, is that still the potential that it would not necessarily be a Band-Aid to this building, but it may in fact be a new facility within this property?
That would depend on what those factor's sake. You know, that's what it would depend on. You gotta stay off of it. Maybe even say it's just like all the things. It would depend on what it says.
Dr. Smith, thank you. Over there, Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Grant. I'm doubly vested because I'm a staff development teacher at the state school and humanities teacher. I'm also a proud kindergarten mom with 2 more to follow. So this is really just an observation more than it is a question. But what I see every day, we moved to the community 3 years ago because I've been teaching there for 13 years, and I just could not imagine my kids not going to Poolesville when I see every single day how amazing the instruction is and the commitment to academics. With that said, what I see every day, day in and day out, is our students being successful despite the building. And we always talk about our teachers, that we talk to our teachers about the fact that we don't want our students to be successful despite their teachers. We want them to be successful because of their teachers. And it's the same with the building. We want them to be successful not despite the building that they're in, but because of the facility that they're in. So that's just something I wanted to say. So thank you for being here.
Appreciate it. We'll come back to you. In the back, go ahead. Yep, thanks.
I'm Donald Wilson. I've got a kid at the elementary school, middle school, and the high school. And I testified in 2012 before you got, well, you guys were there. I was there. And we testified that we did not like the fact score, we did not think it was accurate, and we fought to get it removed. And we never thought that it would be removed and we wouldn't have a date, oddly enough. I know my children are not going to see a new high school. I would hope that if my kids stay in there and have children, they will have a high school, and that's why I continue to fight for a new high school. But when I testified this fall, I had asked, don't just grandfather us, you should grandfather everyone that's on the list, because we've been lied to multiple years to say, oh, this is your date, oh, nope, sorry, this is your date, nope, sorry, this is your date. And to take it away and put not even a TBD and stuff is just another, like, blow to us as a community. So we would really like, not just us, but Wooten. I know families that go to Wooten that are just as equally upset and confounded by everything. That was one thing. The other is there's a little girl that went to the elementary school. She's now at the middle school who had cancer. And the PTA funded a robot essentially to remotely go to her classes when she was at cancer treatment. They had tried to get a bill through the state to get funding for that to be within the state's capacity, and they denied it, of course. But is it a possibility that the county provides it? Because not every PTA has the funding to buy these machines and equipment, and that the county could provide some that could be checked out for the times that are needed for these children so that they can be in the building. And I know that Peyton was able to interact with students. She was new to our community, so that is how she was able to make friends remotely. So it's just as an idea that maybe if the state's not going to do it for the state, maybe the county can, the Board of Education in Montgomery County Public Schools could provide these services around the county.
Yes, we can do that. And in fact, we just had a staff demonstration at the State Department of Education back in December, looking at that lately, and it's absolutely doable. Absolutely.
Go on.
Joy actually asked my question.
Okay, very good. Over on this side, George Coakley. Then right next to you.
Just for clarification, a couple people mentioned 2 buildings at Poolesville High School. There's 3 buildings for security purposes that the students are using, because they have the greenhouse, so you have access and egress going in.
Just clarity?
Yeah.
All right.
Always George.
Yeah, I'll get you in the back in a minute.
Sure. I have a question regarding policy status. At one point in your presentation, you made it sound as though the new policy with the KFAs it sounded like it had not been approved by the board. So what is the status of the policy? Can I put on that?
So tomorrow,
Can you turn the mic on? Sorry about that. You can just leave it on too. It's fine.
tomorrow we are presenting suggested revisions to the policy management committee of the board, where they will deliberate on that, and they may make some more changes and revisions and edits. The next step will then be to move those to the full board for review, and if the full board approves it, it will then go out for public comment, and there'll be a public comment period where the public can weigh in on that. We'll go back to policy management committee to review those public comments, more changes made, and then ultimately adopted by the board. The time frame, there's multiple aspects to policy FAA, which we talked about, that it governs this process, but many other things. There's going to be different stages of that. When do you think that would be done?
So we are anticipating moving through a couple of sessions of the policy management committee over January and March. Ideally then, the board would be able to move the policy to public comment in late spring. And our intent is to have it open for an extended period of time because, of course, as evidenced here and as we know, this is a very important policy. We want to be sure we have a lot of time for community and stakeholder engagement. So we're anticipating a few months of public comment period, and so we would look at sort of hopefully sometime in the spring and definitely summer and then potentially early fall to then bring that back to the board in early fall.
Okay, so if approval, if the policy happens in the fall, then is that when assessments would begin for this building?
No,
or is it you're doing that in parallel?
We're doing it in parallel, and certainly the effort to assess our buildings and again to bring together some information we have as well as additional information we want to gather and verify. We need to do that regardless. So there's not a policy direction that wouldn't result in us needing to do that. So we don't need to lose time by not doing that. And so that's what we'll be doing. We're going to embark on some of these tracks parallel, and then bring them together in the fall.
It's absolutely essential that the policy be in place before next year's CIP. So next November, that's the year from now. Because that CIP needs to be able to answer many of the questions you're asking tonight and other communities are asking across the county. Absolutely. It has to be in place. We all understand that.
Okay, Jerry, real quick, and then I'll get you in the back.
Okay,
Sorry.
If I understand you correctly, what you're saying is you've got these preliminary set of KFIs, and you're going to have a parallel path where you're going to take these preliminary KFIs and evaluate schools with them, update them with respect to what the board says, and then relook at these schools based on the updated KFIs. I guess what I really want to know, cut to the chase, is when will this be completed by, and when will Poolesville know what's going on? When will we know a date? I mean, give us a date. Is it January 2019? Is it December? Is it May of next year? What is the date that we will have some degree of certainty to know what's going to happen with Poolesville High School?
So it will be as a part of the CIP process that is initiated in September of next year or October. And as Dr. Smith said, this has to be done all in time for the amendment year of the CIP. We have our public hearings in November, as you know, and the work sessions will take place next November. What I would say in the interim, I think a really good step would be to have additional conversation with the Poolesville community, whether it's through the cluster at PTA level, Board of Commissioners, but I would really welcome that as we go through this process so that we hear your feedback just on the work that we're doing, as well as we can provide updates to you throughout the process. And we do need that iterative feedback loop.
Well, it's not like we haven't been telling you, and I don't mean to sound sarcastic or snotty about this, that we haven't been telling you. One of the first things when I became the Educational Liaison Commissioner was I started creating lists, which I attached to all of my testimonies. Now there might have been probably some typographical errors and maybe some wrong dates at the top. But the bottom line is we have been telling MCPS what the problems have been since 1996 and before that. And you have a concise list in my testimony along, I think, additional comments in Kevin's and Donald Lowell's testimony as cluster coordinators. So it's not like this conversation hasn't been taking place for the past 22 years.
And what I was referring to actually was the process itself. The KFI indicators, not the actual condition of the facility, but how we're looking at it and getting feedback on that. And especially in light of the comment we just heard around advocating for a change in the fact process earlier. So I think that's really important that we engage on the front end so we get some feedback. Not just, here with Poolesville, but also with other clusters. And we've been doing that. I don't know if you've attended the county-wide meetings we've had with the PTA, but we did a fair bit of engagement throughout this process, but we need to come back, and I think it'd be germane to really focus in on Poolesville specifically.
Thank you. And we appreciate you bringing the people that are here tonight, as well as all the media places where this is going to end up, bringing us up to speed and making more of the community aware of it. I've got a question in the back. Oh, sorry. Never mind. Hold on. I got to get Tracy first. She's got arthritis in her elbow from raising it and lowering it so many times.
We get this new process approved. So I'm going to flip this a little bit. We got this flexible process now. We really, realistically, could get an improvement sooner rather than later, rather than the flip side. Possibly. So I would
I can't make any promises.
Well, I'm going to follow up on what Jerry was saying. If you go back, all three of my kids actually did testimony in front of the school board in 2013. Have you all seen this? Whenever people go, it's Poolesville's turn to go out. It's our night. We fill up the room. It's unreal. So, are you aware of this history? Have you seen any of this testimony?
I've experienced it the last 2 years.
Okay. In 2013, there was a little Dr. Seuss speech, which you should go revisit. So I want to, promote that we are coming out in huge numbers, and if there's anything that this community can do, if there's fundraising we can do on the side, if it's this community thing, and plug that we have. One of the issues when you do the new schools is where you're going to put the new school. Well, we have the physical space to build the new school and stay in the old school, and so we've got a lot of things going for us to get us on this list like now. As soon as we get this process approved, actually the facility really is at the point where Band-Aids just aren't working anymore. And one of the things I did before I came up here, I actually made my daughter. I'm going to be hiking Philmont this summer, so we've been weighing the backpacks and that sort of stuff. So I have my daughter, who is not going to Philmont, but goes to the high school with her backpack. She carries 34 pounds to high school and the halls that are too narrow, so she can't use her locker. And that's on a day where she doesn't carry textbooks. So she's carrying around 34 pounds every day in and out of the school with no locker access because the hallways are too narrow to even get to your locker, and some lockers don't even work, and just the layout itself, not the asbestos and the access and the, just even being in the hallways, the building itself is an issue. So.
Okay, appreciate that. In the back, yes, finally. Thank you.
Hi, Bernadette Morrow. I'm new to Poolesville about 7 years ago, so there's a long history here that I really don't fully appreciate. I didn't grow up in the area, so I didn't go to Poolesville or any of the other Montgomery County schools, but we picked Poolesville because of the school in large part and the quality of the high school, and just it's a great community. So I have a couple of questions on the KFIs and how that's going to work. I appreciate the idea that there's money set aside for the infrastructure and money set aside for capacity. I think when push comes to shove, capacity is going to win because you got to have a seat for the kids to sit in. That said, I think somebody spoke earlier about trying to look at the macro level, but then also at the individual regional level, and what makes sense for one community doesn't necessarily make sense for another community. So my first question is, how is that going to be incorporated into the KFI process, or is that going to be sort of a side thing that gets done? My second question related to the KFIs is, both the FACTS and the KFIs can very sort of individual school focused. Is there going to be any consideration in those KFIs where projects at one school can solve multiple challenges that the county is facing. So we talked about, you know, we already have the land to build a school on, and maybe we make that bigger, and now we can open up some more seats for the magnet program, and maybe some additional capacity for the westward development growth. So now we've solved a couple of different problems for the county with one solution. So is that going to get incorporated into the KFIs? And then my third question, not related to KFIs, is, from my own understanding, as these new communities go up, like downtown Crown and things like that, how does, you know, sort of the permitting process for those developments to go up? I mean, do they have, developers need to pay money into the county, that some of that gets portioned off, that, hey, we know we need more schools to fill for these houses that are going up, and, you know, so how are we?
Yeah, just on the last one, yes, the answer is yes, that there is a school impact tax that is paid. And an ongoing question is whether it's high enough. And that's one of those, that's a county planning board conversation, and our board weighs in on that when those regulations are up. And they were up actually recently. And what year was that? I think 2 years ago. So that's just to answer the school impact tax question. The KFIs, and just to clarify, it's the facility assessment. That's what it is. It's assessing a facility based on just different factors. And so again, that becomes the starting point to really answer your question. I mean, one of the things we're trying to do is to solve multiple problems here with limited dollars. And so there's a really good example currently in the CIP that is it in the CIP currently? Right? I'm sorry. This is so many times. But Dubuque Elementary School is a really good example of one where the facility itself on its own may not necessarily qualify just for rise to the very, very top priority, but we have a major overcrowding situation, a visual parking, we have programmatic needs. We bring all those dollars together to move a major capital project at Dubuque, which solves multiple problems at once. So I think there's a lot of ideas here that are being generated that need to go into the mix as we go through this process. But I do just want to clarify that KFIs is not, it's just the assessment part of it. There's still a decision-making framework that we need to apply to how to allocate dollars in an equitable and fair fashion to address the many problems. And so I just did want to clarify that.
So earlier you asked for a specific date. Adrian, when do we have to submit it? Is it December 1st to the county?
Yes. So the board acts sometime at the end of November, and we must submit to the county executive December 1st of that year.
So December 1st, 2018, that when that goes into the county executive, and county executive, he or she, whoever it is in the county election, will have to create a budget based partially on that school system CIP. That is the date. On that date, if you backward map, the policy has to be changed, the assessments have to be done, and we have to make decisions to go in next year's amendments to the CIP, because this CIP has a tremendous number of questions in it. And there's a very large one here in terms of what you're asking. That's your date right there, is that it will have to be done, all of this, prior to less than 1 year from now, December 1st, 2018.
So what else can we do to positively impact that on behalf of Poolesville?
Pay very close attention to the policy adjustments. Submit information about, as Dr. Zuckerman just said, about the process, you know, in terms of what the PIF should be like, and ask for a meeting with them and say, we want to influence this and how it works and how it will work. Because one of the problems, when I worked for 3 years at the state, I was the chief academic officer, and then I was the interim superintendent for almost a year, which is a job I would never want. But what I saw was you have Kent County with fewer than 2,000 kids closing 2 of their 7 schools. You have Montgomery County growing massively. You have Carroll County struggling because they're closing schools. I saw that from the state level. Then I moved here, and I see the same thing here. Not that we're closing schools and we're not struggling, but we have small schools, large schools, urban schools, rural schools, suburban schools. And so what has to be designed are systems and processes that will give enough flexibility to do that. Old schools, brand new schools that are overcrowded, old schools that are under capacity, old schools that are over capacity. And so by those conversations, we will have better collective IQ around it by having conversations just like tonight across the system. And Poolesville can influence this by providing lots of feedback prior to the policy if you want. You can address it to Dr. Zuckerman, you can address it to me, you can address it to Board Member Pat O'Neill because she's the chair of the policy committee. Always people can provide feedback and say, look, we've been spending a lot of time talking about this, thinking about it, and we are here at this point, and we want to make sure that you design something in this policy that does not put us in the 2002, 2006, 2008, 2014, 2018, 2024 situation in an ongoing way. So that's what I would say is the most valuable is specific information about the policy, about the process, and watch it closely all the way through. And we can help you with that, as at your request, as your cluster coordinator and your town government. Ask for that. We will be responsive to that and provide it.
If I could piggyback onto what Dr. Smith just said, back when I received the article on the Baltimore Sun about Delegates McIntosh and Senator Conway, I sent out an email to all the PTA presidents asking them to forward it to all of their PTA members. And in it, basically I said, I would encourage everyone to talk to their PTA members, neighbors, and those who attend any fundraisers or political events leading up to this session, that is the 2018 Maryland legislative session, which has started, to express their support for an initiative with respect to getting more money from the state for our county schools. And that if the schools get more money, then the state, perhaps the county will refrain from raising your taxes to pay for the same thing. It's a win-win for all our residents. And in that email, I listed our District 15 delegation, Senator Brian Feldman and his email address, State Delegate Kathleen Humay and her email address, State Delegate Aluna Miller and her email address, and State Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo and his email address. And if you want, you can go and click on Maryland State Government, and there it'll bring up a website which will give you the phone numbers, email addresses, mail addresses of each state senator and House delegate in Maryland. And also you can find the governor's address. You can go to http://governor.maryland.gov/the-governors-office/ and you can email him as well. If you want more money, you need to go to the state to have them in our delegation to bring back the funds back to Montgomery County. It's not going to happen just by 5 commissioners sitting here. All you up in the audience need to do that. You need to go ahead and email, talk with the county council members, state delegates, etc. Thank you.
Over there.
I'm Randy Davis with the.
Oh, sorry, Randy. On her toes, buddy. You're right after her. She's raised her hand for the last half
No,
hour.
it's fine. I thought you were pointing to me.
No, it was, but I meant her.
Sam Baggett, I'm a daughter at JPMS, and I've been here living for 30 years. I'm also on the PTA, and I attended the board to try to keep Monocacy open, and it was brought up at that time about redistributing the Clarksburg borderline, and we were shut down. No, you can't do that. I heard it brought up again tonight. Is that something you all will consider? Because that would help the capacity issue for Clarksburg and give more bodies to Poolesville, which would give our numbers more. Maybe push us towards the new school a little faster. I know my daughter will never see the new school.
As the board was adopting the CIP right at the very late November 29th to get it ready to send in December 1st, one of the points I made, and you can see it on the tape, but it's not worth your time to look it up and say what it said, the county has to no longer hold clusters sacred. They need to look at adjacent schools, not just the schools within a cluster. And we've got to do that. And part of what I would suggest that you put strongly in the communication to the board about the policy is that very idea. Look at the adjacent schools. Because actually Monocacy, when I looked at this on my map in my office, is closer to Little Bennett than many other schools are.
And I mean,
And I see that.
the reason that Monocacy had opened is because Poolesville people were able to go to Monocacy. I live in Poolesville, I'm on the other side of Poolesville, but I opted to go to Monocacy. I made the best decision of my life. The next thing I wanted to know is you talk about assessments. Who does these assessments and what are the specific criteria? You keep talking assessments, but nobody said exactly who does them and what are the criteria.
For the construction.
So the assessments are a variety of things. So it's we're looking at space conditions, so we're looking at indoor air quality, we're looking at temperature conditions, we're looking at aspects such as acoustic, we're looking at daylighting. So we're really looking at facilities from a comprehensive perspective to really understand how the facility impacts the classroom space. Beyond that, obviously age, infrastructure. I mean, it's a long list of all the elements that contribute to learning. So
Who's doing the assessment? Do you actually show up at the school to look at them?
yeah, so there's actually quite a bit of data.
You're just looking at them on paper?
No, absolutely. So there's things that you know about a design, you know about daylighting from past plans. There's things that you don't know about it, so until you're there. You know, obviously security is actually a big part of it. You don't understand the dynamics of security until you're there in dialogue with staff, with security teams. So there's an aspect where you're looking at it from a historic perspective, work orders through maintenance, but there's also the operational element.
So it's definitely nothing to just on paper, as Mr. Adams was saying, we have a wealth of information that we know that collected over the years from our experience in the schools, from maintenance and repairs we've done in the schools, from work that our construction team knows from different assessments they've done. We're going to be bringing that information together, both what we have, as well as going back out to the schools, and our own staff will be conducting those assessments. In addition to, we are going to be working with the consultant. We're going to be getting a third party to work with us, partly to just, again, help bring some fresh eyes and fresh perspective to that and get that validation.
When you go to school, are you going during the day when the students are there sitting in the hallways eating lunch and trying to squeeze through the hallways with them?
The capacity and then the width of the hallway, as those dimensions.
All those aspects that obviously, you know, the width of the corridor is a big thing. You know, even the presence of a facility when you walk up to the facility, all those are part of the assessment. You want a school to feel like a school. You want a school to be a space where people want to come to. So all those elements are part of the assessment. So there are aspects that will be done remotely, but there's quite a few aspects that are done during the school day in conjunction with staff and administration.
And an important factor, which gets back to a question that was asked previously, also, you really do, each school is different, each school has aged differently, each school is experienced differently, and we really want to be looking at the experience of the school itself, rather than trying to over-standardize across, again, areas and schools and experiences that are all different. We need to know what's happening at this school, what's the operational impact of this teacher at the school, because even different teachers can operationalize differently at different schools. So we really are trying to take a very on-the-ground, individualized approach to the school assessments.
Hang on for a second, Randy. I'll get you in the way back next, okay?
I'm Randy Davis with the Monocacy Monocle, and I shared some thoughts with my readers. That our fear of problems and worries was not whether we get a new school or renovation. Our fear is if we would lose our school. Now, I don't know what the smallest high school in town is. Can you tell me what it is?
I think it's Seneca Valley right now.
And how many is that?
1,200.
We have a high school without Dow County kids, there's 600 kids there. John Poole Middle School is going to feed 400. So we're talking about a high school without the magnet programs. It's going to, and we have to face this, folks. This is the truth. We have a high school that's going to be 500 to 600 kids, and we may have a few here and a few there, and a couple hundred. Maybe we'll get up to 7. And I was very encouraged when you said that in your opening statement that you would even consider an agricultural program. that's ideal for us.
We're actually looking at it.
That's a wonderful, I mean, because that's what we are. And that can give us some more students. And changing some boundaries can help. But bottom line, I don't believe for 1 second that Poolesville owns any magnet programs. All good intentions aside, all the pressure from all the other schools, principals, and teachers is they'd love to have those magnet programs. And I'm afraid that by putting off the renovation, decade after decade, I'm going to say year after year, decade after decade, that the cost of renovating is going to be so high for a school of 500 high school kids that it's going to make a whole lot more sense to say, let's do something else. So I would like to ask, is there any assurance that we will not lose our magnet programs?
Dr. Smith, I think he's already.
Yeah, I see no possibility of that in the coming years. I just don't, when I look at the number of students, when I look at the space adjacent to Poolesville, when I look, one of the things, we're building a new school in Seneca Valley, you probably know that.
Yeah.
But we need to put a career and technology program there and expand it, which will reduce the actual capacity for students who aren't in that program, but will add value for Poolesville, Damascus, Clarksburg, all the kids who cannot get to Edison. And so I just don't see it happening.
I don't see us being busted down the crown. I had heard that boundaries for Prince George's might be reviewed. And that some of the boundaries for Prince George's might be reviewed. And that some of the students might be directed toward Crown. And the concern I have, Crown's too far away. Prince George's just down the road.
They hit that first thing, Randy, no correlation, correct? Yeah, no correlation.
No correlation.
Between the two.
And, well, I have to, with all due respect, okay? Mr. Smith, you may not be the superintendent. I hope you are. You seem like a wonderful man and a smart man. But life is such. You've been here 18 months, someone. And all these, 27 years old. I'm not the youngest. My kids grew up in great public school. What I'm actually, so, and we'll have a great school, and that's all we want. That's what I want to know: is this town going to keep that school? And it sounds to me, the good news is my biggest fear of something relatively soon is not going to happen.
When's your
But it's going to happen in 5 or 6 or 7 years after that. There's no assurance.
When's your next deadline? We want to make sure you put that in place. Because if you put it in print, it's
Friday,
real.
and I got it ready.
That's right.
I'm a little bit reassured, but
Yeah.
I'm not totally convinced. I think we're going to for 7 years, or as long as Mr. Smith is smiling.
Okay, in the back, and then we kind of put a stop at 10 o'clock on this. Go ahead. I'm ready for you. You don't get the whole 10 minutes, but go ahead.
Proud parent of a fifth grader, Mr. Robbins, excellent elementary school. I've got a comment and a quick question. The comment is kind of quick too, but it is going to be somewhat negative. I'm not very happy to hear about the flexibility. Okay, you come in and you talk about how the old plan was not flexible. It was flexible enough that Poolesville to get bounced for years. That kind of say that Poolesville stands to be better off with a new flexible program just rings hollow in my ears. I don't think we have your core intentions or anything like that, but the flexibility is too extra. Is what I'm getting. As for the comment, the question that was asked before about the evaluation criteria, are they codified in detail online by the county? So where may they be found?
So a couple of things. On the I hear your point that the rigidity was flexible in terms of being delayed. What wasn't one of the reasons for the delay was that the sequence was always pushed out in order. There was not an ability to revisit that or adjust the priorities, and that's what we mean by the rigidity. So I agree. Your point is well taken. It clearly wasn't so rigid that we couldn't deviate from the dates. That was funding dependent. And as the funding was not sufficient, we did have to make those adjustments in dates. But the flexibility we're talking about is to be able to revisit how to approach projects and how to integrate priorities. So that's just to clarify there. But I agree with In terms of where they're codified, at the moment they're not. Again, we're working through the policy process. We did, however, make a presentation to the board in May and again in August. And in August, it's on the website. You can post it or send it. Looks like Joyce has it.
Yeah, so if they haven't changed from them, from that, if that slide has not changed, I will post that to the town Facebook page.
That would be
Yeah.
great. And actually, and perhaps even a link to the whole presentation, maybe just because it gives some context around that. But so that was the presentation where we gave the most detailed presentation to the board of what we propose to look at in the key facility indicators and in the assessment. So that's available, and we'll be continuing to refine those as we go through the policy process.
Now, is the plan to actually, I looked at it and you said it has to be published, but is it going to be like a 30,000 foot overview, or is it actually going to be some not so subjective evaluation comparison criteria?
The latter. And the board has asked us, part of the process, and we wanted to do this is to ultimately have all of this data up on every school in the form of a dashboard that would be updated periodically, very transparent, and that's just part of the process.
So can I make a quick?
Sure, absolutely.
Commissioner Kolstowski earlier made a point that I just want to make sure didn't get lost. The Knott Commission that Andy was talking about, Martin Knott's Construction Commission, talking about construction funding from the state and the rules around that, and there are many in Maryland, and the Kerwin Commission looking at school funding, are both critically important. One of the things I would say that you could do is write to your delegation, write to the leaders of the Senate and the House of Delegates, Mr. Bush and Mr. Miller in Annapolis, and talk about the fact that in both of these circumstances, Montgomery County actually puts out more money than it takes in from the state. And, you know, I sound like Benedict Arnold here, so work for the state. But hey, I took a job here, I'm all in for here.
Amen.
That when the first initial report came out for the Kerwin Commission, they said, yeah, Montgomery County needs, you know, $300 million more to fund their schools, but they should lose $300 million of state funding, and the local citizens, residents, should make up that difference. Now, they backed away from that a little bit, but I would say really attuned to what they're up to, because there are just so many factors. And we cannot let our community lose even more than we're taking in. And when we talked about forward funding a few minutes ago with the Knott Commission, this is the only school system that forward funds in any significant way. Baltimore County's done a little bit, Howard County's done a little bit, no one else has done any for all intents and purposes. And what it means is we wind up getting significantly less state money because they do it based on wealth. And wealth is a very complicated formula that's used at the state. But what I think the statement to our elected officials and what I say to them is, we cannot be the funder of the state of Maryland. And our school system has to be protected because it's one of the economic drivers of the community, and this county is the economic driver of the state. And I don't say that with any pride or any, you know, we're more important or we're better. It's just the truth. As Montgomery County goes, this state will go. And I saw that long before I ever thought about working here or living here, just from being with the state for 3 years and looking at the data, the information. I chaired the IAC at the state level, which allocates all the state money. And so the Knott Commission and the Kerwin Commission, if you just reference those to the elected officials and say, you know what, you need to not only protect us, you need to get us some of what we're already contributing back from the Montgomery County. It's just because it's not possible to pay out all the money that goes to the state and pay out all the local money that is needed here for the school system. It's just not possible.
And I would say that your comment about us being the economic driver, in our macro Poolesville, our high school is pretty much our that's a really important piece. That's important about all of us in community. It really is a huge, important part of our economic success.
Absolutely.
Economics, it's social.
One more question in the back. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I have a daughter who's almost 2, and I hope that she'll attend the Poolesville High School cluster, and everything remains the same. But I do have 2 questions about the criteria for evaluation. The first is, do the number of students that attend the school have any bearing on the quality of the schools? Okay. Also, are parts of it ranked for different, meaning like, is it weighted? Are some things considered more important than others? And the criteria?
The first question, as we shook our heads, but because people heard us say, no, the number of students is not an indicator of the condition of the facility. So they have a different analysis of the But do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, there absolutely are, as it currently exists, weighted criteria. So certainly, like say, certainly any aspect related to health, IEP standards. So there absolutely is a weighted criteria.
And is security one of the considerations about HICA? Because I heard you talk about how multiple buildings isn't necessarily a concern, but I work at a non-public school in Montgomery County, and I will say security is a huge concern at our school. And we have one building, and we all have badges, the doors come up instantly, and these are none of the things that are available, it sounds like, at the high school. And that's considered. They do lock automatically?
No. Our school.
Hang on. You can lock automatically from one of us that they're locked. Okay, well, yeah, doors. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that. Listen, I'll take one more if anybody wants to before we wrap this up. Did we answer everybody? Okay, very good. Thank you. That's our job. So first of all, I want to thank you guys for being here tonight. That was our education liaison requested, and you came. And that showed us a willingness to listen and a willingness to accept some feedback on a different level than the busloads of people that have made it their absolute, their must do is to attend the school board meetings, to come up here, give us a different level. And I'm going to say a different level of reassurance. So I have more reassurance than probably Randy does. Maybe there's a mix here. But what you've done is given us a more of a well-rounded viewpoint, and it said it's the 3 mile, the 1 mile, the 300 feet, et cetera. We kind of appreciate you tying all that all in for us. Thank you. I also, before I wrap it up, I want to one more time acknowledge our 4 principals that are here right now. So stand up one more time. You deserve every round of applause. And then finally, just to wrap it up, because Jerry's elbowing me to pin everybody down as hard as I can here. So I do want to say thanks again for your willingness to listen. This is big for us. We really don't feel like we have representation on a political level, and we fight for it. But the mere fact that you're here tonight means a lot to us. And we expect this to be as collaborative as it was tonight. You can see we're nice people. We get along. We have goals, but we want to be we want to be treated with respect. We appreciate you coming up and doing that. Facility condition, you've heard everything that we've had to say about that. We really hope that the working with the individual schools, with our school business manager, Susan Croner is here too tonight, taking time to be here to be a part of this. She knows Poolesville High School better than anybody probably ever has in recent times. Thanks for your interactiveness with her. The maintenance of programs, your pledge to continue to the, as much as you could be committed to in the foreseeable future, the maintenance and enhancement of our programs, that's huge. That's one of the reasons why we had to have you come up here tonight. Because of the lack of reassurance through the CIP and through the process as you change processes there. That's very alarming to us. I think you've helped us a little bit get over on that. Thank you for considering the expansion of school boundaries. We know that that's kind of gone on the table and come off the table. We always wanted to be on the table if it will somehow enhance our cluster. And we appreciate you considering that. Partnership with the county and the state in terms of potentially bringing us a community center along with our new high school. That is something that, I know you guys know this, but the high school essentially is our community center. And it plays a role for us more than it does for, I can imagine, I've been all over the county for just about anywhere else in the county. It's big for us. You know we're isolated up here. Combining facilities could be huge for us. We appreciate your cooperation on that. We appreciate your acknowledgement of that. And hopefully you'll fight with us if that will help bring us a new Poolesville High School sooner. And then finally, last but not least, replacement of Poolesville High School still is our goal. Will always be our goal. Will always be the reason why there's school bus loads. Will always be the reason why we're putting pressure on politicians. Will always be the reason why if we don't feel like we're not being represented, that's one of the reasons why. It's so important to us. And I'm just thankful that you guys are here tonight. You've heard the pleas from our residents. We're never going to stop fighting for that. We're always going to push for the success of the overall cluster with Poolesville, new Poolesville High School being the head of that. So we really appreciate you guys taking and understanding that. I'd like for everybody to give a round of applause to these representatives come up. I also want to thank our school liaison, Jerry Klobakowski, for carrying the flag for this long, and he's done a tremendous job, along with our cluster coordinators, past and present. Keep up the good work, and I'm glad you're doing it.
One footnote, there is a myriad of people who are running for the county council at large seats, in District 1, and then the county executive as well. One of the things, if you go to one of their events, is to ask them, what are you going to do about funding Poolesville High School? What are you going to do about funding the MCPS? What are you going to do to help us get where we need to be? Because you're going to be able to have to look at these people and cut through the niceness that they're, what they're telling you, and look to the heart of the issue, and you believe they are telling you the truth. And then when you go to the polls, vote. You've got to vote in the primaries and in the general election. You've got to vote.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
I make a motion we adjourn.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.